Hello, math students. Mr. B here. All right, we're going to be talking about how to find out what the domain and range is for a graph of a relation or function. It's really easy to do. Basically, the domain are all the x values you see in the graph, and the range is all the y values you see in the graph. So here's a simple graph of a relation. This is actually a function too, right? It passes the vertical line test. But this technique for finding the domain and range works for either a relation or a function. So from this graph, what are all the x values you see? This is going to be an interval of the x-axis, right? So this point right here is the leftmost point of the graph, and then it kind of humps around like a roller coaster kind of thing up to this point up at the top. And both of the ends are solid dots. That means we're going to include those in either the domain or range. So the domain, which I've kind of illustrated here with this D, everything from A to B, those are the x values you see in this graph. If you take any place on the graph and come down to the x-axis, what are all the possible x values you would see? Well, it's everything from A, including A, up to B. So we're saying that the domain is A to B, including the ends. So you might review interval notation if this notation isn't making sense. Remember, the square bracket means we include. If it's around parentheses, we don't include. For example, let's say the right end wasn't a solid dot, but was an open circle. Then the right edge of the domain would not be included. The B would have a round parentheses. Okay, anyway, we have a solid dot, so we include the B. What is the range? The range is all the y values you see in the graph. So think about all the places on the graph and what their y value, what the point's y value is. That whole set would be everything from C up to D, including the ends C and D. So that's the range. Okay, let's go through various pictures here and see if we can identify the domain and range. How about this line? This is the line y equals 1/2 x plus 1. It's a function. I could write it as f of x equals 1/2 x plus 1. But the interesting thing is it goes forever and ever to the right, and it goes forever and ever up to the right. And on the other side, it goes to the left forever, and it goes down forever. So I hope it's clear that the domain are all the real numbers, negative infinity to infinity. And the range is also all real numbers, negative infinity to infinity. Okay, how about this square root function? What x's do you see in this graph? Well, the leftmost point you see is -3, and there's a solid dot there. So we're going to include -3 in the domain. And then there's every x value seen forever and ever to the right. That arrow right there is saying this thing keeps going to the right. So -3, including -3, up to infinity is the domain. How about the range? What's the smallest y value you see in this graph? Well, this point here has 0 for y, and it keeps going up. It keeps going to the right here, but it keeps going up. It never really flattens out totally horizontal. It just keeps going up. And so we would get every possible y above 0 and 0 itself. So that's the range. All right, how about this little hump-shaped piece of curve here? This is some relation. It's actually a function, right? It passes the vertical line test, so I'll say this is a function. Function f of x or something like that. All right. what are all the x values we see in this graph? Well, the leftmost edge is -2, but it's an open circle, so we don't include -2, but everything to the right of -2 would be in the domain up to 4. Then there's no more curve, right? So the curve ends at x equal 4. And it's a solid dot, so we're going to include 4. So the domain is -2 to 4, not including the -2, but including the 4. So square bracket on the 4, round parentheses on the -2. All right, how about the range? What values do we see for y in this graph? Well, the smallest y value we see is 0. And the highest we see is 3. And is there a hole at 2? Well, not really. Even though the left end here is an open circle, we do have a graph point that has a 2 for y. There's no holes anywhere. In fact, there's some y's that are doubled up. We see those values twice. Some we don't. Right down here, we only see a y value once. But the y values you see are everything from 0 to 3, including 0 and 3. This next one's kind of cool. It's 2 pieces. This is a piecewise function. And it is a function. You can see that any vertical line you choose touches the graph at least, well, at most once. At most once. Some places it doesn't touch it at all, out here and here and in the middle between the 2 pieces. But yeah, a vertical line touches at most once. It's a function. So what's the domain and what's the range? Because it's 2 pieces, you might think of the domain as being the domain of each of the pieces glued together with a union, which is what we're going to do. What's the domain for this the left piece? Well, open circle at -5, so we're going to start at -5 and go up to 10, not include -5, close circle at 10, so we're going to include 10. So square bracket at 10, parentheses at -5. And then the second piece goes everywhere from 12 to 21. We're going to include the 12 because of the solid dot, and we're going to not include 21 because it's got an open circle. Okay, so then we're going to stick the 2 together with a union. What's the range we see here? What's the smallest y value in the graph? Well, there's this open circle, and that's at -2, but just above the open circle, of course, points would start on the graph. So the range starts at -2 and goes up. And it doesn't stop until we get to 11. And it doesn't include 11 because of the open circle up there. What about in the middle here? That's just a place where we're getting maybe the same y for 2 different x values. That's still a function, and that's a y value we're seeing in the graph. We're seeing it twice. Some places you only see a y value once. Some places you see a y value twice. Yeah. All right, so the range is -2 to 11, but not including the ends. One more, and then we'll quit. So this egg-shaped graph is called an ellipse. And I think it's clear that the x values you're seeing are everything from -4 up to 4. So that's the domain. And the range are all the values from -3, including -3, up to 3, like that. All right. So that's how you figure out what the domain and range is from a graph. We'll see you in the next video.